My dad's fiance called me a beluga whale and threw out my lunch in Miami, then told me to cover up so no one had to see how ugly I was. When I asked her how she could do this to us, she just smiled and said, "Your dad always wanted a big family." I didn't say a word. That was over a year ago. Yesterday, she sent flowers to our house with a note that just said, "For the twins. When did your family sacrifice your happiness for their own?" I have the opposite of daddy issues. My father is such an amazing man that it tricked me into thinking every man was great. When I was a child and he only had enough change in his pocket for one of us to get ice cream, he always let me have it. And whenever he saw me crying over a bad report card or dumb friend group drama, he would literally take the day off work to take me to my favorite diner and order practically every dessert on the menu. And it's for this reason that he only started seeing someone new when I was 16, because he never wanted me to be confused about who my mom was. Needless to say, I was super happy for him. In just their first month of dating, she bought him flowers, and he was coming home every day from work with an extra big smile on his face. He was practically beaming. And it wasn't until I finally finished high school that I was allowed to meet her. She spoke softly, and I got the impression that she was the type of woman any man other than my father would take advantage of. Very kind. We were sitting at the kitchen table with 2 beautiful plates of homemade pizza when I realized just how wrong I was. Halfway through the meal, my dad went to the bathroom. Suddenly, Catherine put 3 of my slices back on the table. "Your metabolism isn't going to last forever. You'll thank me when you're older." I was so stunned that I didn't even have a chance to reply. And when my dad returned, neither of us mentioned what had just happened. I was going to tell him when she left, but as soon as the door closed, he began singing her praises. "Isn't she just the best? I'm thinking of proposing to her soon. What do you think, darling?" His joy was practically lighting up the entire room. I couldn't be the one to put it out. "Yep, she's great." A few days later, I woke up to him hitting me with a surprise. It was a leaflet for a holiday in Miami. "Honey, there's a huge discount for this resort in Miami. I was thinking the 3 of us go, you, me, and Catherine." A cold dread instantly filled my stomach. "If you know you and that crazy beach can count me out," I wanted to yell, but instead I plastered on a huge smile and said, "Of course I'm down." He then sat on the edge of my bed and booked it right there on his phone. I decided to make the most of the trip and packed all my summer clothes. Tube tops, linen pants, shorts, you know the drill. When we got there, the sunlight instantly entered my bones, and I swear I felt like I had popped a Emily or something. Me and Catherine were lying on the sunbeds when I felt it, a pinch on my upper arm. "Darling, you look like a beluga whale," Catherine said with disgust. She proceeded to take my tray of food and throw it out. "If you want the boys to like you, you can't just be a greedy W word." My face flushed with heat, but this time it wasn't from the sun. It was embarrassment. Was I really that fat? Immediately, I felt an overwhelming urge to hide my body from the world so they wouldn't have to see how ugly I was. And I guess she noticed because she handed me a towel and told me to cover up. I guess 18-year-old girls really are impressionable, because I spent the rest of the weekend either fasting or pretending to eat in front of my dad so he wouldn't worry. Catherine would praise me for this and tell me that soon I could look like her. Even after the trip was over, I kept under-eating, and 3 weeks later, I looked in the mirror and saw my face had drained of color. Hair was falling out. I could barely stand without feeling like I was going to collapse. And as I did my daily body check, my dad walked in. "Honey, what the F did you do?" he cried out with tears in his eyes. "Have you not been eating? You look so pale, baby." At that point, I was so hungry I could barely think about anything other than food, let alone keep a secret. So I said the first thing that came to my head. Catherine told me that I should lose weight. I said it casually, unaware of what would come next. "What?" My dad's voice shifted. It had turned into something scarier, an anger I had never heard before. He didn't say anything else, just carried me to the kitchen and cooked me my favorite meal, homemade chicken Alfredo. As I ate, I realized how dumb I'd been, and vowed to myself to never punish my body again. Suddenly, my dad's voice erupted through the walls. This was the first time I had heard him raise his voice at anyone. When he returned, his face was bright red with anger, and I discovered Catherine was the source of his fury. "We broke up," he said. "Wait, Dad, I don't think she meant to hurt me." "It's not your fault," he interrupted my guilty explanation. "She's an adult, and she should have known better." He then sat beside me, and we spent the rest of the day watching Vampire Diaries, my comfort show, together. The next morning, I woke up to find Catherine in our kitchen, making breakfast. My dad was nowhere to be seen. "Good morning, sweetie," she said, as if nothing had happened. "Your dad and I had a long talk last night. He told me everything, about how you've been lying to him about me." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I have all our conversations recorded on my phone. Every time you agreed with me about your weight. Every time you thanked me for my advice. You never once told me to stop. Your dad was devastated when he heard them." She slid her phone across the counter, and there it was. Audio recordings, but edited, rearranged, making it sound like I was asking for her help, begging her to keep it secret from my dad. "He's at a hotel right now, thinking about what to do. He feels so betrayed that you would blame me for your own issues." I grabbed my phone to call him, but she was faster. "Oh, and one more thing," she said, pulling out an envelope. Inside was an ultrasound photo. "It's twins. Your father always wanted a big family. Fresh start, you know." I stood there frozen, my mind racing to process what had just happened. Catherine's calculated smile remained fixed as she watched me struggle to comprehend the depth of her manipulation. The ultrasound photo lay on the counter between us like a declaration of war. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone again, but Catherine stepped closer, blocking my path to the hallway. She moved with the confidence of someone who had already won. I backed away, bumping into the kitchen counter. Catherine began tidying up the breakfast dishes, humming softly as if this were any normal morning. The casual domesticity of her actions made my skin crawl. She wiped down the counters, arranged the fruit bowl, and even watered the small herb garden my dad kept by the window. I finally found my voice, though it came out weaker than intended. I asked her how she could do this to us. She paused in her cleaning, tilting her head as if genuinely puzzled by my question. Then she resumed wiping the already clean counter, her movements methodical and precise. The silence stretched between us until I couldn't stand it anymore. I pushed past her toward the living room, desperate to find my car keys, but they weren't on the hook by the door where I always left them. I searched frantically through the couch cushions, under magazines, anywhere they might have fallen. Catherine appeared in the doorway, dangling my keys from her finger. She mentioned that my dad had asked her to hold on to them, worried I might do something reckless in my current state. The keys disappeared back into her pocket before I could even think to grab them. My phone phone buzzed with a text. My heart leaped, hoping it was my dad, but it was just a promotional message from my phone carrier. Catherine noticed my disappointment and made a sympathetic clicking sound with her tongue. She suggested I should probably eat something, gesturing toward the breakfast she'd prepared. The sight of food made my stomach turn. I remembered too vividly how she'd weaponized meals against me, turning nourishment into shame. Instead, I retreated to my room, slamming the door behind me. I immediately tried calling my dad from my laptop, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I left message after message, each one more desperate than the last, begging him to call me back, to let me explain. Through my bedroom door, I could hear Catherine moving around the house, drawers opening and closing, the vacuum cleaner running. She was settling in, making herself at home in our space like she belonged there. I tried to think rationally. There had to be proof somewhere that those recordings were edited, but I didn't know anything about audio technology. How could I prove something I didn't understand? Hours passed. I must have called my dad 50 times. Each unanswered ring felt like another brick in the wall Catherine was building between us. I even tried calling his work, but they said he'd taken personal time off. Around noon, Catherine knocked on my door. She announced that she was going out to run some errands and would be back later. I heard the front door close and her car start up in the driveway. This was my chance. I burst from my room and searched the house for any evidence I could use. I went through her purse she'd left on the kitchen table, finding nothing but typical purse contents. Her phone was gone, of course. I searched my dad's room next, looking for anything that might tell me which hotel he was staying at. His dresser drawers were slightly messy, evidence of hasty packing, but there were no hotel receipts, no clues to his whereabouts. The photo albums on the shelf caught my eye. I pulled one down, flipping through years of memories. Pictures of my dad teaching me to ride a bike, birthday parties, school plays. In every photo, his love for me was evident in his smile, his protective arm around my shoulders. Tears blurred my vision. How could he believe I would lie to him? We'd been a team for so long, just the two of us against the world. Now Catherine had driven a wedge between us with surgical precision. I heard a car in the driveway and quickly returned the album to its place, but it wasn't Catherine's car. Through the window, I saw our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, retrieving her mail. An idea struck me. I ran outside, probably looking wild-eyed and desperate. Mrs. Chen looked concerned as I approached. I asked if she'd seen my dad leave this morning. She said she'd seen him loading a suitcase into his car around dawn, looking upset. She asked if everything was all right, and I almost broke down right there on her lawn, but I just nodded, thanked her, and went back inside. At least I knew he'd really left, that this wasn't just another of Catherine's lies. Catherine returned an hour later with shopping bags. She'd bought groceries, including all of my dad's favorite foods. The presumption of it, the confidence that she'd already won, made my anger flare. She unpacked methodically, reorganizing our pantry as she went, moving things from where my dad had kept them for years, erasing our systems and replacing them with her own. I watched from the doorway as she worked, trying to understand how someone could be so calculating. Every move she made seemed designed to establish her presence, to show that she was here to stay. She pulled out a pregnancy vitamin bottle and made a show of taking one, placing the bottle prominently on the counter where my dad would be sure to see it when he returned, if he returned. The rest of the afternoon passed in tense silence. Catherine prepared dinner for two, setting the table with our good dishes. She even lit candles, as if this were some romantic dinner rather than a hostage situation. I refused to eat with her, grabbing a granola bar and retreating to my room again. Through my door, I could hear her eating alone, the clink of silverware against china unnaturally loud in the quiet house. As evening approached, desperation clawed at me. I couldn't just sit here while she destroyed my family. I needed to find my dad, to make him listen to me. But without my car keys or any idea where he was staying, I was trapped. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That my dad's girlfriend was being mean to me? That she'd edited some recordings? They'd probably laugh at me. This wasn't a crime, just cruel manipulation. Catherine knocked on my door again as darkness fell. She informed me she was going to bed early, that pregnancy made her tired. She reminded me to lock up if I went anywhere, her tone implying she knew I couldn't leave without my keys. I waited until I heard her bedroom door close, then crept out to the living room. Maybe I could find her phone while she slept, see the original recordings, but her purse was gone from the kitchen, likely taken to her room. Frustrated, I slumped on the couch where my dad and I had watched countless movies together. The indent from where he always sat seemed to mock me. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? My phone buzzed. My heart raced as I saw it was finally a text from my dad, but it was short, formal. He said he needed time to process everything, that he was disappointed I hadn't been honest with him, that Catherine had shown him proof. I typed back frantically, trying to explain, but the messages showed as delivered without being read. He'd said his piece and shut down communication again. Catherine had coached him well. Sleep was impossible. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios in my mind. How could I prove the recordings were fake? How could I get to my dad? How could I expose Catherine for what she really was? Morning came too soon. I heard Catherine moving around the kitchen again, the coffee maker gurgling to life. The domestic sounds that should have been comforting now felt like an invasion. I ventured out to find her on the phone, speaking in that soft, sweet voice that had fooled my dad. She was talking to someone about doctor's appointments, playing up the pregnancy angle. When she saw me, she smiled and waved as if we were friends. After she hung up, she informed me that was my dad. He'd called to check on her morning sickness. The casual cruelty of it, letting me know he'd called her but not me, was perfectly calculated. She'd made breakfast again, setting a plate at my usual spot. I ignored it, grabbing a water bottle from the fridge instead. She shook her head sadly, as if I were a rebellious child refusing to see reason. The morning stretched on. Catherine seemed to have an endless list of ways to mark her territory. She rearranged the living room furniture. She threw out the old magazines my dad collected. She even changed the contact paper in the kitchen drawers. Each change was small, but together they transformed our home into something unrecognizable. It was psychological warfare, and I was losing badly. I needed to act, but Catherine had effectively trapped me in my own home. My laptop became my lifeline as I researched audio editing detection methods. The technical jargon made my head spin, but I forced myself to understand. Frame rates, compression artifacts, splice points. I took screenshots of everything, building a folder of evidence. Catherine's footsteps approached my door. I quickly closed my laptop and grabbed a book, pretending to read. She entered without knocking, carrying a tray with soup and crackers. Her smile was maternal, caring, completely at odds with the monster I knew her to be. She set the tray on my nightstand and sat on the edge of of my bed. Her hand reached out to smooth my hair, and I had to fight not to flinch away. She spoke about pregnancy cravings and morning sickness, painting a picture of domestic bliss that included her, my dad, and the twins. My role in this fantasy family seemed notably absent. After she left, I pushed the food aside and returned to my research. I discovered that edited audio often had telltale signs in the waveform patterns, but I needed the original files, and those were on Catherine's phone, the phone she kept with her at all times. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten properly in days, but leaving my room meant facing Catherine's suffocating presence. I waited until I heard the shower running, then crept to the kitchen. I grabbed an apple and some crackers, shoving them in my pockets like a thief in my own home. The mail slot clicked, and I saw several envelopes hit the floor. Among the usual bills was a letter addressed to my dad in Catherine's handwriting. Without thinking, I grabbed it and retreated to my room. My hands shook as I held it up to the light, trying to see through the envelope. Steam under the bathroom door told me Catherine was still showering. I carefully worked the envelope open, my heart pounding. Inside was a lease agreement for an apartment across town. Catherine had already signed it. The move-in date was next week. I photographed every page with my phone before carefully resealing the envelope. The shower turned off. I rushed back to the entryway and placed the letter back with the other mail, then dove into the hall closet just as the bathroom door opened. Catherine's bare feet padded past my hiding spot. I held my breath, pressing myself against old winter coats that smelled like my dad's cologne. She paused at the mail, and I heard her pick up the letters. A satisfied hum told me she'd found what she was looking for. I waited until her bedroom door closed before emerging. My mind raced with this new information. She was planning to move my dad away from our home, away from me. The calculated cruelty of it made me sick. Back in my room, I studied the lease photos. The apartment was small, just one bedroom, no space for me to visit, no guest room for holidays. She was erasing me from my father's life with surgical precision. My phone remained silent. No calls from dad, no texts, nothing. I tried calling his work again, but the receptionist said he'd extended his time off. I asked if she knew which hotel he might be staying at, but she couldn't help. Catherine knocked on my door, announcing lunch was ready. I ignored her, but she persisted, her knocking becoming more insistent. Finally, I opened the door a crack. She stood there with that practiced smile, holding a plate of sandwiches. I told her I wasn't hungry. She tilted her head with false concern and reminded me about the importance of nutrition. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd starved me in Miami, and now she was force-feeding me to play the caring stepmother role. She pushed past me into my room, setting the plate on my desk. Her eyes scanned my space, taking inventory. They lingered on my laptop, and I saw her mental gears turning. She asked what I'd been working on, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. I mentioned homework, keeping my voice steady. She nodded but didn't look convinced. Her fingers traced along my desk, stopping at my phone. She picked it up, examining it like she was checking for dust. Then she set it down, slightly out of reach. After she left, I grabbed my phone and checked it thoroughly. Nothing seemed different, but paranoia gnawed at me. What if she'd installed something? What if she could see my messages, my calls, my photos? I decided to test it. I texted my best friend asking to hang out, something normal and innocent. Within minutes, Catherine was at my door again. She mentioned that it might not be a good time for visitors, that my dad wouldn't want me to spread family business around. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. My suspicions confirmed, I knew I needed a different strategy. I couldn't use my phone or laptop for anything sensitive, but I also couldn't just sit here while she dismantled my life piece by piece. That night, I pretended to go to bed early. I turned off my lights and shoved pillows under my blanket to create a body shape. Then I crept to my window, grateful my room was on the first floor. The window slid open silently, and I dropped into the bushes below. Mrs. Chen's house was dark except for the blue glow of her television. I knocked softly on her back door, hoping she was still awake. After a moment, her face appeared in the window, surprised but concerned. She let me in immediately. I explained I needed to use her phone, that it was an emergency. She didn't ask questions, just handed me her cordless phone and gave me privacy in her kitchen. I dialed my dad's number from memory, my hands shaking. This time, he answered on the third ring. His voice was tired, defeated. I spoke quickly, telling him about the edited recordings, about Catherine's manipulation, about the lease agreement. He listened in silence, and I couldn't tell if he believed me or thought I was making things up. When I finished, he sighed deeply. He said he needed to see proof, that Catherine's recordings were very convincing. I told him I was working on getting evidence, begged him to just come home and talk to me. He said he'd think about it and hung up. Mrs. Chen offered me tea, but I declined. I needed to get back before Catherine noticed I was gone. I thanked her profusely and slipped back out into the night. The window to my room was still open, and I climbed back in, my heart pounding. Catherine's door was still closed, no light showing underneath. I'd made it. I changed into pajamas and crawled into bed for real, my mind spinning with plans. At least Dad had answered. At least he'd listened. It was a start. Morning brought new challenges. Catherine announced she'd made an appointment with a family counselor for us to work through our issues. The appointment was that afternoon, and she'd already told my dad about it. He thought it was a wonderful idea, she said, smiling sweetly. I knew this was another trap. A counselor would only hear Catherine's version of events, see her tears and gentle demeanor. Without proof of her manipulation, I'd look like a jealous daughter trying to sabotage her father's happiness. I agreed to go, knowing refusal would only make me look worse, but I spent the morning preparing. I wrote down every incident I could remember, every cruel word, every manipulation. I took photos of the notes with an old digital camera I found in my closet, one Catherine didn't know about. The counselor's office was in a building downtown. Catherine drove, maintaining pleasant chatter about how this would help us all move forward as a family. I stared out the window, watching familiar streets pass by, wondering if my dad would ever drive me anywhere again. The counselor was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a soothing voice. Catherine had clearly briefed her beforehand, because she started by addressing my supposed eating disorder and how it had affected the family dynamic. I sat there, stunned by the preemptive strike. Catherine cried on cue, talking about how she'd tried to help me, how my father was devastated by my lies. She pulled out printed screenshots of text messages I'd never sent, thanking her for her support with my body image issues. More fabrications, more digital manipulation. When it was my turn to speak, I felt like I was drowning. Everything I said sounded defensive, paranoid. The counselor took notes with a neutral expression, but I could see her drawing conclusions. Catherine had won this round too. On the drive home, Catherine reached over and patted my hand. She said she was proud of me for sharing, that admitting problems was the first step to healing. The condescension tension made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to nod and thank her. Back home, I found a package on my bed. Inside was a new phone, still in its box. A note from Catherine explained she'd gotten me a fresh start, that my old phone had too many triggering memories. She'd already transferred my contacts, she said. How thoughtful. I knew immediately this was about control. The new phone would be monitored, tracked, limited. My old phone was nowhere to be found. Another piece of my life confiscated under the guise of caring. That evening, Catherine made my dad's favorite meal. The smell of pot roast filled the house, a scent that usually meant comfort and family. Now it felt like a mockery. She'd even made his mother's recipe for apple pie, something I'd never mastered. She set 3 places at the table, humming cheerfully. My heart leaped. Was Dad coming home? But when I asked, she shook her head sadly. The 3rd place was symbolic, she said. To remember we were still a family, even when apart. I couldn't eat. The empty chair mocked me throughout the meal. Catherine kept up a one-sided conversation about baby names and nursery colors. She'd already picked out themes, she said. Noah and Emma for the twins. Classic names for a classic family. After dinner, I helped clear the table in silence. Catherine washed while I dried, a domestic scene that felt like a horror movie. She talked about hiring someone to help with the housework once the babies came, someone to replace me in yet another way. My new phone buzzed with a text. It was from my dad, saying he was proud of me for attending counseling, that Catherine had told him I was making progress, that maybe we could all have dinner together soon if I kept improving. The manipulation was masterful. Every move I made was twisted into evidence of my instability. Every attempt to reach my dad was filtered through Catherine's narrative. I was trapped in a web of her making, and she was the spider at its center. That night, I lay awake planning. I needed something concrete, something undeniable. The original audio files were key, but Catherine's phone was always with her. I'd have to wait for the perfect opportunity. Days blended together in a haze of forced meals and false concern. Catherine documented everything, taking photos of us together that she sent to my dad. Look how well we're getting along, the images said. Look how happy your daughter is. I played along, smiling for the camera while plotting behind dead eyes. I attended 2 more counseling sessions, saying what Catherine wanted to hear. I was struggling with jealousy, I admitted. I was worried about being replaced. All true, but twisted to serve her narrative. The counselor suggested family activities to help us bond. Catherine jumped on this, planning outings that showcased her maternal side. We went shopping for baby clothes, where she held up tiny outfits and asked for my opinion. Other shoppers smiled at us, seeing a sweet family moment instead of the psychological torture it was. We visited a prenatal yoga class where Catherine introduced me as her stepdaughter, who was so excited about becoming a big sister. The other mothers cooed over how lucky she was to have my support. I smiled until my face hurt, playing the role she'd written for me. Each outing was photographed, documented, sent to my dad as proof of our bonding. See how well Catherine is handling this difficult situation, the subtext screamed. See how patient she is with your troubled daughter. One afternoon, Catherine had a prenatal appointment. She asked if I wanted to come to hear the baby's heartbeats. The thought made me sick, but I agreed, knowing refusal would be reported as another sign of my instability. At the clinic, I sat in the waiting room while she went back for her exam. This was my chance. Her purse was on the chair beside me, her phone inside. My hands shook as I reached for it, but just as my fingers touched the leather, a nurse called my name. Catherine wanted me to come back, to be part of the experience. I forced enthusiasm as I followed the nurse, my opportunity lost. In the exam room, Catherine held my hand as the doctor moved the ultrasound wand over her belly. 2 heartbeats filled the room, strong and steady. She squeezed my hand, tears in her eyes. Real tears this time, I thought. The babies were real to her, even if nothing else was. They were her anchor, her guarantee that my dad would never leave her. On the way home, she stopped at my dad's favorite coffee shop. She knew the barista by name now, ordered his usual without hesitation. Another piece of his life, she'd claimed. She got me a hot chocolate, remembering exactly how I liked it. The perfect stepmother performance continued. Back home, I found my dad's cologne in the bathroom trash. Catherine had replaced it with a new brand. Something more sophisticated, she said when I asked. She was remaking him piece by piece, erasing the father I knew and creating someone new. That night, she made dinner wearing my mother's apron. I hadn't even known we still had it, buried in some drawer for years. But Catherine had found it, claimed it, worn it like a trophy. The fabric was faded but clean, and seeing her in it felt like a desecration. I excused myself from dinner, claiming homework. In my room, I stared at the old digital camera, reviewing the photos I'd taken of my notes. They weren't enough. I needed more, something that would break through the wall of lies Catherine had built around my dad. My new phone rang. Dad's number appeared on the screen and my heart jumped. But when I answered, it was Catherine's voice. She'd borrowed his phone to call me, she said. He was in the shower, but she wanted to let me know he'd agreed to come for dinner tomorrow. The cruelty of using his phone to call me was perfectly calculated. She wanted me to know she had access to him, control over his communications. The hope I'd felt seeing his number crushed under the weight of her voice. I spent the rest of the evening preparing for his visit. I organized my evidence, such as it was. The photos of the lease agreement, my notes about the incidents, the research about audio editing. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. Catherine spent the next day in a frenzy of preparation. She cleaned the already spotless house, prepared an elaborate meal, even put fresh flowers in every room. She wanted to present the perfect home, the perfect family in waiting. She had me help with the cooking, teaching me her techniques with patronizing patience. She spoke about how important it was for young women to know their way around a kitchen, how my future husband would appreciate these skills. Every word was calculated to diminish me, to reduce me to outdated stereotypes. As evening approached, my nerves were shattered. I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say to my dad 100 times, but would I get the chance? Would Catherine ever leave us alone? Or would this be another performance with me as an unwilling actor in her show? The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock. Catherine smoothed her dress and touched her belly, a gesture I'd noticed her practicing in mirrors. She opened the door with a radiant smile, welcoming my dad like a returning hero. He looked tired, older than when I'd last seen him. His hug was stiff, formal, nothing like the warm embraces I was used to. Catherine hovered nearby, her hand on his arm, marking her territory. Dinner was excruciating. Catherine dominated the conversation, talking about the babies, the counseling sessions, how well I was doing. My dad nodded along, barely looking at me. When I tried to speak, Catherine would interrupt with some anecdote or observation that painted me as troubled but improving. After the main course, Catherine excused herself to the bathroom, Finally, a moment alone with my dad. I leaned forward, speaking quickly and quietly about the edited recordings, the manipulation, the lies, but his expression remained closed off, skeptical. He pulled out his phone, showing me the recordings Catherine had sent him. My voice, clear as day, asking her for help with my weight, thanking her for keeping it secret, begging her not to tell my dad about my issues. The editing was seamless, professional. How could I prove something looked real when it wasn't? Catherine returned before I could respond, carrying the pie she'd made. She served us both generous slices, playing the perfect hostess. My dad complimented her cooking, and she blushed prettily, mentioning she'd been practicing his mother's recipes. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of small talk and false normalcy. When my dad finally stood to leave, I felt panic rising in my throat. This couldn't be it. This couldn't be how it ended. But Catherine was already at the door with his coat, helping him into it with wifely care. He hugged me goodbye, whispering that he loved me but I needed to get help, that Catherine was trying her best with a difficult situation, that once I accepted her, we could be a real family again. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with my tormentor once more. Catherine closed the door and turned to me with a triumphant smile. She didn't need to say anything. We both knew she'd won this battle. But as she walked past me toward the kitchen, I noticed something that made my heart race. Her phone was on the hall table. She'd set it down while helping my dad with his coat and forgotten it. This was my chance, possibly my only chance. I waited until I heard water running in the kitchen, then grabbed the phone. My fingers flew across the screen. She hadn't changed her passcode from what I'd seen her enter at the counselor's office. I found the voice recorder app, scrolling through dozens of files. There they were, our conversations from Miami, from the kitchen, from every interaction we'd had. I plugged in my earbuds and listened to one. My blood ran cold. The raw files were exactly what she'd played for my dad. No editing required. But wait, something was off. I checked the dates. These recordings were from times we'd never spoken, conversations that had never happened. Then I understood. She hadn't edited our real conversations. She'd created entirely fake ones using voice synthesis technology. The app was right there on her phone, something called VoiceForge. She'd sampled my voice from our real interactions and used it to create completely fabricated conversations. I screenshotted everything frantically, sending the images to the old email account I'd created for my digital camera photos. The water in the kitchen stopped. I had seconds. I opened her text messages, finding chains of conversations with someone named Tech Support Mike about the voice synthesis process. Catherine's footsteps approached. I set the phone back exactly as I'd found it and dove onto the couch, grabbing a magazine. She entered the room, glancing at her phone before picking it up. If she suspected anything, she didn't show it. That night, I lay in bed vibrating with excitement and fear. I had proof, real proof, but I needed to be smart about how I used it. Catherine had shown she could twist any direct confrontation to her advantage. I needed a plan that she couldn't manipulate or explain away. The next morning, I woke early with a plan forming. Catherine was already in the kitchen, humming while she made breakfast. I grabbed my old digital camera and headed to the garage, pretending to look for old school supplies. Hidden behind dusty boxes, I uploaded the screenshots to my laptop through the camera's memory card. Catherine appeared in the doorway, watching me rifle through boxes. She mentioned that breakfast was ready, and I should eat before it got cold. Her eyes tracked my movements as I tucked the camera into my pocket and followed her inside. At the table, she served me eggs and toast while talking about nursery furniture she'd been browsing online. I nodded along, forcing down food that tasted like cardboard. My mind raced through the next steps of my plan. After breakfast, Catherine announced she had another prenatal appointment. She asked if I wanted to come again, but I claimed I had homework to finish. She seemed disappointed, but didn't push. 20 minutes later, I watched from my window as her car pulled out of the driveway. I immediately went to work. Using my laptop, I created a new email account and sent the evidence to multiple addresses. Then I printed everything: the screenshots of the VoiceForge app, the text conversations with Tech Support Mike, the lease agreement photos. My hands shook as I organized the papers into a folder. Mrs. Chen was watering her garden when I approached her fence. I asked if I could borrow her phone again, explaining it was urgent. She invited me inside without hesitation, concern etched on her weathered face. I called my dad's office directly, bypassing his cell phone. The receptionist put me through to his extension. When he answered, his voice was professional, distant. I spoke quickly, telling him I had proof about the recordings. Real, undeniable proof. He started to dismiss me, but I interrupted, begging him to meet me at the coffee shop on 3rd Street in an hour. Just him, no Catherine. I promised if he looked at my evidence and still didn't believe me, I'd never bring it up again. After a long pause, he agreed. I thanked Mrs. Chen and rushed back home to gather my folder. Catherine's car was still gone. I grabbed my jacket and the spare house key hidden under the garden gnome, then set off on foot toward downtown. The coffee shop was nearly empty when I arrived. I chose a corner booth and spread my evidence across the table, organizing it chronologically. My leg bounced nervously as I watched the door. My dad arrived 15 minutes late, looking haggard. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually neat appearance was disheveled. He slid into the booth across from me, his expression guarded. I pushed the folder toward him without speaking. He opened it skeptically, but as he read through the screenshots, his face changed. The color drained from his cheeks as he saw the VoiceForge app, the technical discussions about voice synthesis, the proof that the recordings were fabricated. He studied each page methodically, cross-referencing dates and times. When he reached the lease agreement photos, his hands started trembling. The apartment Catherine had chosen was 40 minutes from my school, with no guest parking and strict visitor policies. I watched him process the truth, seeing the moment when the full weight of Catherine's deception hit him. His shoulders sagged, and he covered his face with his hands. When he looked up, tears tracked down his cheeks. We sat in silence while he composed himself. Then he pulled out his phone and showed me more messages from Catherine. Sweet, concerned texts about my well-being, updates on the babies, promises about their future together. All sent while she was systematically destroying our relationship. He asked how I'd gotten the evidence. I explained about finding her phone, the voice synthesis discovery, sending everything to myself before she noticed. He shook his head in disbelief at the calculated nature of her manipulation. I showed him my notes from the incidents, the food shaming in Miami, the body comments, the escalating control. He read each one, his jaw clenching tighter with every page. When he finished, he looked older than I'd ever seen him. He made a decision right there in the coffee shop. We would go home together, pack Catherine's things, and change the locks. The pregnancy complicated things, but he couldn't stay with someone who would manipulate his daughter so cruelly. The drive home home was quiet. I could see him processing everything, occasionally shaking his head or muttering under his breath. When we pulled into our driveway, Catherine's car was back. My stomach clenched. She met us at the door, all smiles and warmth. Her expression faltered when she saw my dad's face. He walked past her without speaking, heading straight for their bedroom. I heard drawers opening, hangers rattling. Catherine followed him, her voice rising in confusion and then alarm. I stayed in the living room, my heart pounding as I listened to my dad's calm, measured responses to her increasingly frantic questions. She emerged first, tears streaming down her face. She saw me and her expression hardened for just a moment before returning to devastated innocence. She tried to approach me, arms outstretched, but I stepped back. My dad came out carrying 2 suitcases and a box. He set them by the door and handed Catherine her car keys. His voice was steady as he told her to leave. She could contact him through a lawyer about the pregnancy, but their relationship was over. Catherine's mask finally slipped completely. She turned on me with venom in her eyes, accusing me of destroying her life, of taking away her children's father. My dad stepped between us, his protective instinct finally reawakened. The next few minutes were a blur of Catherine's alternating tears and rage. She grabbed her bags, threw them in her car, and peeled out of our driveway. My dad immediately called a locksmith while I watched from the window, half expecting her to return. We spent the rest of the day reclaiming our home. Every change Catherine had made, we reversed. The furniture went back to its original positions. Her reorganized pantry returned to our familiar system. My dad found his cologne in the trash and put it back on the bathroom counter. That evening, we ordered pizza from our favorite place and ate it on the couch while watching old comedies. Neither of us mentioned Catherine or the babies or what would come next. We just existed in the moment, father and daughter again. Over the following days, my dad took time off work to deal with the aftermath. He met with a lawyer about custody arrangements for the twins. He filed for a restraining order after Catherine sent dozens of threatening messages. He also found a therapist for both of us to process what had happened. I returned to school feeling lighter than I had in weeks. My friends noticed the change immediately, commenting on how I seemed more like myself again. I hadn't realized how much Catherine's presence had affected every aspect of my life. Catherine tried various tactics to regain control. She sent flowers with apologetic notes. She had her sister call pleading her case. She even showed up at my school, but security escorted her off campus when I reported her presence. My dad remained firm in his decision. He would support the children financially and wanted to be involved in their lives, but Catherine had destroyed any chance of a relationship. He hired a lawyer to ensure everything was handled properly. I found my old phone hidden in Catherine's abandoned belongings. She'd kept it as a trophy, perhaps, or insurance. I destroyed it and kept using the new one, but without her monitoring. It felt like reclaiming another piece of myself. Weeks turned into a month. The house felt normal again, though we both knew things had changed. My dad was more cautious now, less trusting. I was warier too, but also stronger. Catherine had taught me valuable lessons about manipulation and the importance of trusting my instincts. The legal proceedings moved forward. DNA tests confirmed the pregnancy was real and the babies were my dad's. Custody arrangements were negotiated through lawyers. Catherine pushed for full custody with minimal visitation, but my dad fought for equal rights. I started keeping a journal, documenting everything that had happened, not for evidence anymore, but for processing. Writing helped me understand how I'd been manipulated and why I'd stayed silent for so long. My dad and I grew closer through the ordeal. We talked more openly now, sharing our feelings and fears. He apologized repeatedly for not seeing through Catherine's act, for choosing her over me. I assured him it wasn't his fault. She'd fooled us both. The babies were born 2 months later. My dad was there for the delivery, texting me updates from the hospital, Noah and Emma, just as Catherine had planned. Despite everything, they were innocent in all this, and my dad was determined to be a good father to them. I met them when they were a week old, during my dad's first custody visit. They were tiny and perfect, with my dad's nose and Catherine's dark hair. I felt a surge of protective love for these half-siblings, who would grow up in such complicated circumstances. Catherine maintained her victim narrative to anyone who would listen. She posted on social media about being abandoned while pregnant, about my dad choosing his disturbed daughter over his new family. Most people saw through it, especially when the truth began to circulate. My dad established a routine with the twins, having them every other weekend and 2 evenings a week. Our house transformed again, this time with cribs and baby supplies. I helped where I could, learning to change diapers and prepare bottles. Life settled into a new normal, not the one any of us had planned, but manageable. My dad dated occasionally, but took things slowly, always introducing women to me early in the relationship. I appreciated his caution and openness. I graduated high school with honors and started college locally, choosing to stay close to home. The experience with Catherine had taught me the importance of family and the danger of staying silent when something felt wrong. Catherine eventually moved on, finding another relationship and moving across the state. She fought the custody arrangement less as time passed, seeming relieved to have weekends free. My dad never spoke ill of her to the twins, maintaining dignity despite everything. Years later, I sometimes wondered what would have happened if I'd spoken up sooner, if I'd told my dad about the pizza incident immediately, if I'd refused to go to Miami. But I'd learned that manipulation thrives in silence and second guessing. The twins grew into happy, well-adjusted toddlers, splitting their time between households. They called me their big sister and climbed all over me during visits. Whatever Catherine's faults, she'd given our family these 2 precious additions. My dad found love again eventually, with someone kind and genuine who respected our family's complicated dynamics. She never tried to replace anyone or change our systems. She simply added to our lives without subtracting anything. I pursued psychology in college, driven to understand how manipulation works and how to help others recognize it. My experience with Catherine became the foundation for my senior thesis on emotional abuse in blended families. The scars remained but faded with time. Trust came harder now, but not impossibly so. I learned to balance openness with caution, to speak up when something felt wrong, to protect myself while still letting people in. My dad and I maintained our close relationship through it all. Movie nights continued, now with 2 toddlers demanding animated films. Our favorite diner added high chairs to our regular booth. Life moved forward, different but not destroyed. Catherine became a distant figure in our lives, relevant only for custody exchanges and co-parenting logistics. Her power over us had ended the moment we'd exposed her lies. The twins would grow up knowing both parents but understanding boundaries. Looking back, I'm grateful for the strength I found through that dark period, for Mrs. Chen's kindness, for my dad's eventual belief in me, for the evidence that set us free. Mostly, I'm grateful we survived it together. Our bond tested, but ultimately unbroken. The family we became wasn't the one Catherine had envisioned or the one we'd originally been. It was something new, forged through difficulty, but held together by genuine love and hard-won trust. And that, I realized, was more than enough.